on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Tonight, Donald Trump insists everybody loves his plan for Gaza. It's after the US president claimed he'd take over the Gaza Strip and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer's under pressure over his deal to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. I'll speak to the Foreign Office Minister, who says the UK won't pay billions extra. Also tonight, outrage from Reform UK as May elections in 9 English council areas are postponed because of local government reorganisation. And I'll speak to an MP working on the assisted dying bill as new changes are proposed to deal with the risk that people could be coerced into ending their lives. And as it's reported, the TV adventurer Grylls was tapped up to become the UK's ambassador to the United States. We've got a very special quiz for you. Venturing into the political jungle tonight, Hannah Bardel and Jonathan Gullis will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. The world feels pretty perilous right now. Insecure, dangerous. Britain, we're told, is in a pre-war situation, but much of the world is at war. And at the centre of this fragility is land. Norms that we've previously taken for granted. Lines on the map that used to feel definite that now feel like they're written in pencil rather than pen. Now, land matters. It's what people go to war for. It matters from an economic perspective, from a security perspective, but also because of something deeper than that. History, identity, belonging, belief. And that's why what Donald Trump said last night was so incendiary.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip
and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
America taking over Gaza. The Palestinians leaving forever to go to countries with humanitarian hearts, in his words. We'll be discussing the international response to those comments on the programme tonight. But it's not just in Gaza where people are losing their lives for the land where they live. In Ukraine too, where Foreign Secretary David Lammy is today, where Ukrainian soil is worth fighting for and worth dying for. And that's why any end to the war, where the map is redrawn, where parts of Ukraine are handed to Russia, well, that is difficult because land matters. Donald Trump talks an awful lot about land. He was a real estate man. Just listen to how he talks about Greenland and Panama, a bit like he's playing a game of Monopoly. Here he refuses to rule out military or economic coercion when it comes to those.
I can't assure you, you're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security.
And then on the other side, you have Keir Starmer, who was basically the opposite attitude to Trump when it comes to land. He's a lawyer. He likes to stick to the rules. And that's why he's determined to push through the Chagos Island deal, handing over sovereignty to Mauritius, because that's a way, he thinks, to abide by international law when it comes to land. But is he going to give the final say on the deal to Mr. Monopoly, Donald Trump? We'll try and find out when we speak to a minister later on. Well, as I said, the Foreign Secretary was in Ukraine today, where he was asked about what the President said last night on Gaza.
We've always been clear in our belief that we must see two states. We must see Palestinians able to live and prosper in their homelands, in Gaza, in the West Bank. That is what we want to get to, and that is why it's important that we move out of phase one of this hostage deal to phase two, and then to phase three. And reconstructing Gaza, we will play our part in that support for reconstruction.
Well, Caroline Levitt is Donald Trump's press secretary. She's probably realised already that one of her main jobs is diffusing diplomatic rows started by her boss. And she's been addressing the president's remarks this evening.
The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region. And let me just take a step back here, because this is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him. And his goal is lasting peace in the Middle East for all people in the region.
Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone joins us now from Washington. Mark, can you just explain, what do you think is actually going on when it comes to Donald Trump in Gaza?
That's a hard question, Sophie. Look, yesterday, I think that it was, his comments came out of nowhere, out of the box, is how Caroline Levitt described it. But let's take the two comments distinctly. First of all, in the Oval Office, he made what was in and of itself a startling comment that Gazans should be relocated permanently, and he emphasized that, permanently, to somewhere beautiful, moved out, is what he said. That was the extension of noise that we've been hearing for some time from the administration, that they would like to see that happening. But it was always described as temporary, so that Gaza could be rebuilt. And in fact, here, 24 hours ago, the man who Donald Trump has put in charge of the Middle East did go into some detail and said, look, the Biden idea that Gaza could be rebuilt in 5 years is just never going to happen. It's going to take 10, maybe 15 years. And so temporarily, yes, Gazans should be moved out. Then Trump changed that and said, no, no, it should be permanent. So that was extraordinary. And on that, Caroline Levitt has rowed back today, and she repeated the word temporary many times. So a clear change in direction, although not expressed explicitly. It was implicit in what she said, temporary, not permanent. So change there. Then there's this idea that the Americans could occupy Gaza, could take ownership of Gaza. She was asked whether it means American boots on the ground. Really interesting answer to that. She said not at the moment, not yet. She was then asked why she couldn't rule it out now. And this is what was interesting. She said in any negotiation, the president will want to hold things back, to keep everything on the table so he can use it as leverage. And I thought that was very, very interesting. And I think I wonder, to answer your question, whether that gets to the heart of it. Because Donald Trump is not a politician. He is a businessman. He's a dealer. The Art of the Deal is literally the title of one of his books. And is this all part of the art of a grand deal for the Middle East? He is suggesting something utterly outlandish that he does not want to do. American boots on the ground? Absolutely not. He doesn't want to do that. He's suggesting it so that people get spooked into then getting themselves involved in whatever deal he actually does want to do. So either this is a suggestion he's putting forward now that he's then going to pull back and claim that he's giving some sort of a concession, or, as I say, he's going to spook Middle Eastern countries, as he would see it, to pull their socks up and rebuild Gaza and deal with their problem themselves.
It's really interesting, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there, reporting from outside the White House. Well, let's talk about the Chagos Islands deal now, because the controversy over the decision to hand sovereignty to Mauritius rumbles on. Yesterday, it was reported that the UK was going to pay £18 billion to the Mauritians, double what was previously thought. And Kemi Badenoch pushed Keir Starmer on this at PMQs today.
Yesterday, we heard the government offered £18 billion for Mauritius to take our territory in the Chagos Islands. This is money that belongs to our children and their children. This is an immoral surrender, so North London lawyers can boast at their dinner parties.
If the Leader of the Opposition is properly briefed on the national security implications when she's asking these questions, which she's perfectly entitled to do, then she knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of national security and legal certainty. If, on the other hand, she's not properly briefed on the national security implications, she's not doing her job, she's not concerned about national security, and she's not fit to be Prime Minister.
Well, I spoke about the Chagos Islands earlier today with the Foreign Office Minister, Stephen Doughty. Thank you very much for being on the programme. So just explain to us, what is the very latest when it comes to the Chagos Islands?
Well, we've secured a deal which protects the crucial base on Diego Garcia well into the next century. And it's a deal that we've agreed with Mauritius. It's the negotiations between the UK and Mauritius, but also importantly one that has been supported across the United States security apparatus. It's absolutely right that we are giving some time for the new US administration to look at the details, and they're being fully briefed on those. But fundamentally, this is a deal that secures our national security and that of our allies into the next century.
Can you just explain something to me? So it's reported that you're giving sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, but you're also giving them £9 billion. What is that money for?
Well, there's been a whole bunch of speculation around the finances,
yeah, that's why
a lot of which I don't recognise.
OK, so how much money are we giving them then?
Well, the details will be provided in due course of the deal. We've said that we'll provide those details with Parliament in due course. We obviously don't normally, as a routine, comment on the costs of our bases overseas, and you'll understand that for national security
But just to be clear, the money is to pay for the base.
So the money is a crucial part of the arrangements, and those arrangements haven't changed. There's been no change
is the money
in that.
to pay for the base? Is that what that money's for?
So
because if you get my point, people might be like, hang on a minute, we're giving them land and we're paying them for the privilege. What's going on?
We pay for basing arrangements around the world, and there are important costs on those. And we're clear as a government that we won't scrimp on our national security. And this base is crucially important to the defence of the United Kingdom and the USA, and indeed to the security of our allies, security in the Indo-Pacific. We inherited an unsustainable situation.
Is the money for the base?
Well, we inherited...
It's really straightforward.
No, absolutely. We inherited... Yeah, we pay for basing all around the world, and we inherited an unsustainable situation for the base from the previous administration. They entered into negotiations, which they were right to do so. Went through 11 rounds with them over 2 years. They seem to have forgotten this. And we're very, very clear that we wanted to conclude this deal to secure the base into the future for our national security. Camille Badenoch doesn't seem to have been briefed on this. And we're very, very clear that this is the right deal.
The money's for the base. It's not for compensation. It's nothing like that. The money is just for the
money
base.
is part of the arrangements around this. It's part of the deal. We'll set out those details in due course. Well, it is a clear answer. We pay for basing all around the world. It's crucial for our national. It's crucial for our national security.
Is this money for the base?
So we pay for basing around the world. It's absolutely clear. We will provide the details of the deal in due course. We're not going to provide, obviously, a running commentary on all the discussions that are going on at the moment, but the quantum hasn't changed. The substance of the deal hasn't changed, and this is a deal that's good for Britain's national security and good for the security of our allies.
You talked there about the security of the allies, and you mentioned there that you're keeping the Americans fully appraised. So my question to you, because I'm just trying to get to the bottom of all this, right? There's been lots of reports that Donald Trump hates the deal, that he's going to stop it, but nothing from him directly on it. So what does Donald Trump think about this?
Well, we're clear that the United States should have time to look at the detail of this. That's an ongoing process. I'm not going to give a running commentary on it. But what we are clear is that the different security concerns, which have been rightly talked about in the media and in Parliament and elsewhere, are addressed by the detail which we're providing in full to our allies in the United States. Now, I think the important thing is that this deal was supported across the United States security apparatus. This wasn't just at a political level. This is the professionals in defence and security who are responsible for our security and the security of the United States. There are important provisions, for example, on preventing hostile forces being in the outer islands, and those are all the matters that are being discussed at this very moment.
It's a nice answer, but it's to a completely different question. What does Donald Trump think about this?
Well, I don't comment on the detail of individual conversations
that are going.
But it wouldn't be. You'd understand it wouldn't be right for me to comment on the detail of the discussions.
Okay.
We're having important and productive conversations, not only with President Trump, but also with the United States Department of State and the Department of Defence and others. And those discussions are ongoing.
Are you prepared to give Donald Trump a veto over this deal?
We've been very, very clear. It was right to give the United States new administration a chance to look at this. There's been no rush into this. It's important they have a chance to digest the full detail. They're being provided that full detail. I'm not going to give a running commentary on that discussion.
Does it get vetoed?
It's important the United States.
You can see it is quite frustrating. So I'm asking you some quite clear things.
It's very important that the United States absolutely is comfortable with this arrangement. That's why we're providing them with the information that they need. Absolutely right that people have got questions. That information had obviously been agreed with the national state's security apparatus under the previous administration. Only right that the new administration gets a chance to look at that. Those discussions are ongoing, but I'm not going to give a running commentary on them.
Now, I did want to talk to you as well about what Donald Trump said last night about the Middle East. He firstly said that the US will take over the Gaza Strip and will do a job with it too. We'll own it. We'll then take it into the Riviera, turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. And he talked about Palestinian people permanently leaving Gaza. He said, I don't think people should be going back to Gaza and that Palestinians should go to other countries with humanitarian hearts. What's your response to those comments?
Well, look, I think if anybody looks at the scenes that we've seen of destruction and damage in Gaza over the last months, they're appalling. And I think you can only be moved by the scenes of Palestinians returning over recent days. We've all seen those scenes on our screens of women and men and children returning to, pretty appalling scenes. And, pay tribute to what President Trump has done in terms of securing that ceasefire and also, crucially, the release of the hostages. It's what we've been calling for since day one of our government, and we've been working assiduously for day and night to achieve. We're very, very clear that we want to see a two-state solution. We want to see a long-term political settlement for a secure and sovereign Palestine alongside a secure and sovereign Israel. We're going to continue to work for that, and we're providing new aid for those Palestinians, 17 million just last week.
Donald Trump has said that the US will take over the Gaza Strip and that Palestinians should not go back. Will you condemn those comments?
Well, we're very, very clear that Palestinians. We're very, very clear that Palestinians should be able to return home. We're giving aid to that effect. We want to see the humanitarian needs.
Will you condemn what Donald Trump has said?
We want to see Palestinians return home. We want to see the humanitarian needs met. I'm here to set out the position of our government, which is for a two-state solution. We're going to continue to work with regional partners and indeed global partners in that regard. And I'm not going to comment on every single comment that's made. We're very clear about our position. We're very, very clear about the scenes we've seen in recent days, and we're going to continue to support the massive humanitarian needs that we see when we see the destruction that's been faced in Gaza.
If you scrub Donald Trump's name from that statement and you didn't know who said it, you would condemn those words. If Kim Jong-un said it, you'd condemn it. If Vladimir Putin said it, you would condemn it. If Hamas said it, you would condemn it. What does Donald Trump have to say for the British government to condemn him, or can he say anything?
I'm very, very clear about our position on this. We've been clear about the aid that we're going to provide. We've been clear about the humanitarian support that we're going to provide. We're very clear about what we want to see in terms of two-state solution. We're going to continue to work with regional and international partners in that regard, and we want to see Palestinians be able to return. We've seen those very, very moving scenes over recent days, and we now need to ensure that those people get the support that they need. And as I said, I pay tribute to the work that's gone on in securing that ceasefire and, of course, the release of the hostages, which has been crucially important. We now need to move through the phases of that process. The Foreign Secretary set out today in Kiev when he was asked about this, and we need to get to that long-term settlement. So we're going to continue working for that. That's what the Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, Development Minister and others have been doing, and we're going to continue to do it with partners in the region and globally.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former SNP MP Hannah Bardel and the former Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis. Great to have you both here. First time on the programme. It was nice to have you on the debut. Lots to discuss here with Donald Trump on his comments on Gaza, what they mean, and then obviously the Chagos Island deal as well bubbling away today. Jonathan, what's your reaction to Donald Trump's pretty provocative intervention on Gaza?
So whilst I accept it would have absolutely caused a ripple effect across the world, I think it's important to always remember that we shouldn't always take Donald Trump literally when he says these things. Ultimately, I think it's actually about trying to use leverage, as your reporter said over in Washington, to try and force the hand of other countries, particularly Middle Eastern countries, into declaring what is their long-term vision to rebuilding Gaza, ensuring the security of Israel, and obviously looking to move the region forward. We know Donald Trump, with the Abraham Accords, was so keen to try and get that deal, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Obviously, the Saudi Arabian monarchy have come out today quite strongly on Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that he needs to face criminal court. And so ultimately, until we maybe see elections in Israel and a change in that government, and obviously the clear, I think the PLO need to really step up in Palestine in order to actually work towards a peaceful solution, then I think Trump is going to try and use whatever he can do to force the hands of other governments, because as he said, he's going for an American first strategy, which means no boots on the ground, no money. This is your mess to sort out.
It's quite hard for the UK government to know how to react to this, because they're obviously... Well, yeah, I'm interested to get your thoughts, because you saw there the minister clearly not wanting to outly condemn what Donald Trump had said, even though I'm sure he profoundly disagrees with
John
it.
Swinney's managed to do it, so I think that any world leader from a Western or progressive democracy, which we like to think that the UK is still, then should be condemning it. I mean, it is proposed ethnic cleansing. That is what Donald Trump's talking about. And I take the point that Jonathan makes that, what comes out of Donald Trump's mouth every day is clearly very unpredictable. And I've got the misfortune of having dealt with him and his people directly over his golf course in the northeast of Scotland, where, he just thought he could do what he wanted. This is a very different situation. I mean, the people of Gaza and the Palestinian people have suffered, genocide, and the notion that they could just be moved on and it could be turned into some holiday resort is deeply offensive, and that is exactly the kind of response that we should accept. And I think the point that you made to Stephen Doughty of what does he need to say, what does he need to do before he gets condemned, because people are so scared of dealing with him, he's pulling the strongman tactics. Perhaps he needs a bit of, blowback himself on these comments. And that's what we want to see from our world leaders is, people standing up for a two-state solution, for peace in the Middle East, and for the people of Gaza and the Palestinian people to be able to have their dignity, to return to their homeland and get the support to rebuild. That's, I think, what is reasonable. And, of course, all of the hostages to be released.
It's... we also speak in the interview about the Chagos Islands deal too, and I think you could possibly sense a little bit of my frustration in not getting the clear answers to what the money was going to go on, how much money, whether Donald Trump had a veto, what Donald Trump thinks. It feels like they're in this position where they can't say very much, but by that virtue of that, it's a bit of a difficult picture.
Yeah, but silence engenders suspicion, doesn't it? And I think the fact that there is the history of this is incredibly important. The people of the Chagos Islands have been subject to, I would argue, colonialism, and this is a hangover from that. And I think this is absolutely the right thing. This is something that the SNP had long campaigned for, spoken up on, seeing that land returned. But if you aren't transparent about how you're using public money, then there will be suspicion. And the International Court issued a very clear directive that they should be returned. And it also undermines our position, particularly in places like Russia, in terms of what Putin's doing. If we're doing the same thing, then how can we criticise and stand up to, other global leaders? So I think that it is the right thing that's being done, but the fact that it was such that we have to understand what the money is for and what support is going to be given and how people from Chagos will be consulted. What's your view on Chagos?
My view is that the Labour government managed to make themselves look shifty and shady, which now further undermines the very deal they're trying to get across the line. Look, when Sir Keir Starmer was talking about national security in Prime Minister's questions today, I'm wondering, well, the national security, for me, concern would be handing over the Chagos Islands to a Mauritius government that's in the pocket of China, that would ultimately take a strategic land base for us with a military base on it, which could potentially be hacked into by Chinese operatives, which is an important way of holding back China, particularly when it comes to Taiwan and other key areas that we know President Xi wishes to try and recreate, let's be honest, the Chinese empire. So I think that the national security threat is serious for the UK and military personnel and the US military personnel on that base. I don't think it's in our interest. I know that Hannah and I would disagree about the importance of international law. I would say it's more of a concept. It was an advisory judgment that we should actually be willing to say no to because it's an important strategic land base. And I think that, when we're talking about billions, £9 billion is 6 years' worth of winter fuel payments to pensioners in this country. We're told that we've got no money in the till by Rachel Reeves over and over again, yet 11 billion in climate change aid, potentially 9 billion on the Chagos Islands, 500 million to overseas farmers, but taking 500 million off UK farmers with this family farm tax. I just think this government does not understand the anger that is out there and how they're saying one thing to the British people, but doing something very different with the British people's money overseas.
Really interesting debate. Thanks both very much indeed. We'll have lots more from you throughout the programme as well. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Anger from Reform UK's leader Nigel Farage as May elections in 9 English council areas are postponed. Stay with us.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Hello, welcome back. Now, elections scheduled for May in 9 council areas have been postponed for a year because of Labour's plans to reorganise local government. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, set out the details of the plan to MPs this afternoon.
The government's starting point is for all elections to go ahead unless there is a strong justification for postponement. And, Mr Speaker, the bar is high, and rightly so. I am only agreeing to half of the requests that were made. After careful consideration, I have only agreed to postpone elections in places where this is central to our manifesto promise to deliver devolution. We're not in the business of holding elections to bodies that won't exist and where we don't know what will replace them. This would be an expensive and irresponsible waste of taxpayers' money. And any party calling for these elections to go ahead must explain how this waste would be justifiable.
Well, opposition parties have piled in. They're not happy. So Ed Davey for the Lib Dems called it a disgraceful stitch-up, and the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, went even further. Let's chat to our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue. Nigel Farage, who you saw today, really unhappy about this.
Yeah, I mean, he is absolutely seizing on this issue. He, I think, has spotted an opportunity here. You know, the government say that this is about overhauling devolution, about making the system simpler, but it does mean that in 9 areas you're going to see local elections delayed. And he summoned us to this press conference. He does this thing where you turn up and you actually don't know what it's going to be about, so you don't know if it's how significant it's going to be. But I had a suspicion that this was what he wanted to talk about, because he's talked about it before, and he absolutely all guns blazing, saying dictators cancel elections. He talked about the cowardice of the political class. But as so often with Nigel Farage, you know, the questions were quite wide-ranging, and I actually wanted to ask him about Donald Trump and Gaza as well.
Yeah, this is interesting, isn't it? Because obviously we've seen the nervousness, as we heard on the programme earlier, around most politicians here about how to deal with the Donald Trump Gaza comments. How did it go with Nigel Farage?
Yeah, well, look, I asked him a pretty direct question. I asked him if he agreed with what Donald Trump had said overnight, and his answer, I mean, it was quite punchy. It wasn't totally direct. Have a listen to it. Donald Trump says he wants to take over Gaza and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. Do you agree?
I love ambition. The thought of a wealthy, wonderful, thriving place with well-paid jobs, casinos, nightlife, I mean, it sounds very appealing to me. I'm not here to answer on behalf of everything the Trump administration has to say. What I will say is he's got off to the most extraordinary start as US president.
And actually, that answer went on for quite a long time. He talked about lots of different things. He talked about tariffs. He said that he thought, unlike in Mexico and Canada, EU tariffs would stick and the UK would somehow be dragged into that. He talked about Chagos and sovereignty. He talked about Peter Mandelson saying he'd advise him, but half his party would hate him for it. And, you know, it kind of speaks to what you led on. He was there. He wanted to talk about domestic, or he'd summoned us to talk about very domestic politics, you know, local authorities. But instead, it was foreign news that dominated. And, you know, you've got to ask the question, Sophie, is this a space that Kemi Badenoch should be filling? Several Conservatives I've spoken to today asking whether you agree with Nigel Farage or not. He is having these big, wide-ranging press conferences and she isn't.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Ali Fortescue reporting for us there. Well, Nigel Farage's press conference is expected to be featured in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening. With tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines, joining us will be the Daily Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall Editor, Claire Ellicott. Right, let's get the thoughts of Hannah and Jonathan, shall we? So, Nigel Farage, I'm interested to get your kind of wider opinion on whether he's cutting through, all that kind of stuff. But, yeah. Hannah, what do you make about this thing about local elections being cancelled in these specific areas?
I mean, it certainly seems, and far be it from me as a former SNP politician to interfere in the matters of local...
You're a pundit now, you can do what you want.
Local democracy, exactly, so I can say what I want. But I do think that it is a very strange approach. Apart from anything else, it's handing Nigel Farage an own goal. you know, an open goal because he's getting the opportunity to come out and say it's anti-democratic and, you know, all the stuff that he said. But I think, you know, I'm not clear that the reasons are that strong for it. And also, it will be a very strange situation to have 9 English local authorities out of kilter with the rest. And, you know, they obviously claim that there are good reasons for it, but, you know, there is something that doesn't sit right around it. And I think that then raises suspicion. And we are in a world at the moment where particularly those on the kind of far right of politics will jump on anything. And it is for us that are, I would say, more in the more progressive, liberal left of politics to do a good job in politics and not give them those opportunities. And that's my main concern, is that it is giving the likes of Nigel Farage the opportunity, you know, and he does cut through.
Yeah.
You know, I absolutely abhor everything he stands for, but he's very clever in the way he communicates
He's
sometimes.
done a very good job with this local election denial of democracy. It has certainly cut through from Conservatives I've spoken to across the country. And ultimately, I agree with Nigel. I don't see why elections need to be cancelled. Why can't we have elections and those new councillors and whatever the makeup of that organisation is to have that renegotiation? But also, Sophie, I also think Conservatives are split on this whole idea of local government reorganisation, which I find, again, utterly bizarre that we're being outflanked by Labour, who want to reduce bureaucracy, reduce layers of government, have fewer politicians, which, by the way, is very popular with the electorate, and save taxpayer money. In Staffordshire, I know there's a huge divide where I still live, and ultimately I think we should be going for a Staffordshire-wide authority. When you get this whole notion of, oh, but these big councils fall apart, no, it's not because unitary councils are a bad idea, it's because you have poor political leaders leading them, making bad decisions with how to use taxpayers' money. So I think Nigel's going to do well here. And by the way, for those areas that are no longer having elections, particularly Essex, Thurrock, and Norfolk, I think where Nigel says he wants to target, Warwickshire, Staffordshire, they'll have more time and more money from reform to target, and it could be a headache for the Conservatives in these local elections.
You're potentially delaying the inevitable. I mean, we've had quite a lot of local government reform in Scotland. We're also going through a boundary redrawal for the Scottish elections next year. And I think everybody needs to recognise the importance of local government and also funding. I mean, one of the things that Jonathan didn't mention was funding. And unfortunately, the programme of austerity over the last sort of decade and a half, 2 decades, and coming from successive UK governments, has done massive damage to our local services. And that is, we are feeling the brunt of that now, whether it's lack of resources for anti-terrorism and anti-terrorism programmes, or just local social NHS and social care. These are the fundamentals for people, and councillors do a really important job. And councillors don't get paid enough. I'm going to say that.
No, I agree with that, Hannah. I agree with that. If you want better councillors, you need to pay them more so they can dedicate at least part-time properly to the job. But on the point that Hannah made about funding for councils, the problem is, and this is where the Conservatives were wrong, we put more and more responsibilities upon local councils, but not the funding to go with it. In this day and age, councils don't need to run leisure centres, as far as I'm concerned. The private sector can pick that up. I don't think councils should be building houses again. That should be something for the private sector to pick up. I very much want the Millet approach of a foyer of ripping off of things that's happening in the local council, so that we have a smaller local government and a smaller state, but focus much more on the things they can actually intervene in, health and social care, particularly for adult and children.
OK, I was going to talk about Nigel Farage, but actually, really interesting chat on councils and local authorities as well. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. As the sponsor for the Assisted Dying Bill tables amendments to enhance the legislation, we'll hear from one of the leading critics of the bill in the Commons, the Conservative MP Danny Kruger. Welcome back. Now, the debate on the assisted dying bill was one of the most moving and passionate House of Commons occasions in recent memory, certainly in my memory. Now, MPs are going through the legislation line by line, trying to improve it and make sure that worries about appropriate safeguards are met. And today, the sponsor of the law, Kim Leadbeater, tabled a new set of amendments supported by the government, which would require doctors to set out the other options available to a patient considering an assisted death. Well, earlier I spoke to Danny Kruger, the Conservative MP who was one of the central opponents of the initial proposals, but he now sits on the committee that's looking at the bill. Thank you very much for being on the programme. Good to talk to you. Now, you are, of course, against assisted dying, passionately against assisted dying, and yet you're in a committee that is scrutinising legislation that would make it legal. How is that?
Well, my opposition is quite practical, actually. I think that there are a whole series of objections to the detail of this bill that I and others tried to draw out in the second reading debate when the whole of the House of Commons debated it. But the second reading debate is really looking at the overall principle of a bill and its objectives. And I'm sorry to say that the House of Commons decided it wanted to proceed with the discussion, and that was the point that was made by the proponents of the bill. Let's go into committee and look at the detail, which is fine by me, because I actually think the detail is where the problem is. So from the beginning to the end of the bill, I think there are issues with it. So on a personal level, I mean, we're all very courteous and we get along. And from next week, we're going to be looking line by line at each clause of the bill and also at all the amendments that have been tabled. And our job is to try and ensure that if the bill comes back to the House of Commons, well, it will come back to the House of Commons, that it's amended in a way that we all think is as good as possible. And I'm sure that I'm going to lose a lot of votes because I think we need to do a huge amount to this bill. But that is my job, to try and ensure that the bill that returns is the best bill possible.
And do you think that the scrutiny is working as it should?
Well, I am actually very concerned about the process that we're going through. It's a private member's bill, which is usually used for very minor, non-contentious matters that members bring on their own that the government is neutral about. They can be important matters, but they're small things, and they don't take up a lot of time. Certainly they don't have the sort of attention that this bill is getting. And really, I think we should have been doing this properly. If the government is behind this, and we all recognise that really Keir Starmer believes in this, he's put 2 ministers on the bill committee, the government civil servants are working behind the scenes on the amendments that are being brought forward in the name of the sponsor of the bill, who's a backbench Labour MP. I think in practice this is something that parts of the government at least, because the government's divided, but parts of the government want. But really, I regret that if the Prime Minister wants an assisted suicide law, he didn't say that in his manifesto and bring it in as a government measure, because then it would have the proper process of scrutiny, of pre-legislative scrutiny, of impact assessments, which we haven't seen yet, proper time in the House of Commons, not just on a Friday when most MPs don't want to be there. It would have a proper committee stage. And we'd have proper evidence as well. I mean, the evidence sessions that we took last week were very imbalanced in favour of the bill, whereas in a proper bill committee there'd be evidence taken from both sides.
So it's hard because you don't want to get too much kind of drowning in process arguments here, but effectively what you're saying is that the way that this bill has been introduced to Parliament, in your view, means it is not going to be properly scrutinised, which means, obviously, many people, including those who are in favour of assisted dying, might find that quite alarming.
I think that's right. And I think there are a lot of people who do actually agree with the principle, and I respect people who agree with the principle. I think it's a fine thing to try and lobby for. People who do agree with the principle recognise that this process is quite deeply flawed. And yes, I mean, next week we'll be looking at the first clauses of the bill. They're enormous in their implication, all about the capacity of somebody to decide whether they want an assisted death or not. Around coercion, around the role of the doctors. We'll be spending a couple of hours in total on all of those topics, probably. We don't know how long it'll take, but, and we'll then be moving on to the next thing. Last week we had 3 days of evidence sessions. So there's 20 of us on the committee able to ask questions. We each got 1 question per witness. There just hasn't been the amount of time and attention that's needed. And I don't think there's been a sufficient public debate either, which it would have had if it had been part of a manifesto, part of an election campaign. I think a royal commission, all of the normal processes by which major social changes should be introduced, we haven't had.
Do you feel that the committee is stacked against your side of the argument? And it's a weird question to ask because your side of the argument lost, right?
Yes.
MPs voted in favour of the principle of assisted dying. But do you think that it's an imbalance in the way it's been done.
Well, I mean, it is imbalanced. I mean, yes, you're right. So the way it works is that the sponsor of the bill, Kim Ledbetter, who proposes it, gets to choose the committee. So she's chosen the people that she wants on the committee, and she's done that with a majority in favour, which is appropriate because there was a majority in favour in the House of Commons. But there are more MPs in favour of the bill on the committee than there were in the House of Commons.
So it's not reflective of
it's not quite
Parliament,
reflective. Likewise, with all the evidence that was taken last week, that was way out of kilter. Far more people in favour of a change in the law than those who are raising concerns. So, I don't want to. I think Kim's doing what she can. I mean, she's using the levers at her command. Actually, she chooses the committee, she chooses the witnesses. She's doing what she can to get this bill through in the shape that she intended it, although already there are quite a lot of changes being proposed by her side. So the bill's got problems. Everybody recognises that. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to improve it sufficiently to make it safe in this committee.
Kim Ledbetter, for example, has brought forward some amendments, like you say, the fact that doctors can't bring up the idea of assisted dying without first explaining palliative care. Are you reassured by some of these steps?
Well, I mean, that's just the statement of what should be common practice anyway. It would be outrageous. In fact, I'm sure it would be illegal for a doctor just to suggest one option of assisted dying rather than making it clear there are other options that should be done. But I welcome that. I think it's important to emphasise that a doctor would have a duty to bring forward, to explain the palliative care options, which of course is the right thing for people who are dying. I actually think we need to go further and stop them suggesting assisted suicide if the patient themselves doesn't bring it up, because there's a real danger, as some of the witnesses did say last week, that if a doctor says to a vulnerable person who's very ill, have you considered assisted suicide, that will put an idea into their head that will make them feel that maybe that is the option that they should take. So I think we need to stop that happening. But certainly doctors should be obliged, as indeed they are already, is what they do, is to make clear that there's a range of options that patients have, and palliative care is very, very good. And we need to make it better and more available. But you do not need to die in terrible agony, and doctors really need to emphasise that.
There's also been a bit of a debate around the role of judges, of High Court judges, whether there's going to be sufficient numbers, for example. What's your view on that?
So there's a big challenge for the bill, because at the moment it says something which I think is very important, and a lot of MPs voted for it on this basis, which is that there should be a High Court judge at the last stage to approve that there hasn't been coercion, that the person has full mental capacity to take this decision, and that all the steps have been followed. That High Court judge is a very important safeguard in my view. There's now a suggestion, we haven't yet seen it, but we understand it's coming, that the government and Kim, the sponsor of the bill, are going to try and amend the bill to take out that stage altogether and replace it with a committee, not a judge, not a court, but a panel of other people, of professionals. Which, by the way, I'm in favour of. The more people with their eyes on each case, the better. But I do think it would be wrong to take out this High Court judge stage, and I think it's very concerning that a key measure of the bill that was used to sell it to us as MPs, an absolute central part of the bill that was introduced and passed at second reading, is now being removed once that hurdle has been crossed. I think that indicates that the bill itself is in some disarray. It was a bad bill in the first place, and it's unravelling now.
What would you say to people listening to you who might think that you are very much against assisted dying, and yet you're on this committee, you're criticising it, you're saying that it's not working, you're talking about the concerns, because you just won't accept the legislation, which is your prerogative because you're against it, but you're not going to suddenly change your mind and be pro-assisted dying. So you're kind of a wrecking force on something that you're never going to support.
That's a really fair challenge, and I think people are right to raise it, actually, but I don't have the power to wreck the bill. I don't want it to go forward. I think it's dangerous in any form, but I have an obligation now that the House of Commons says that it wants to pursue the bill in committee to try and ensure that it's as safe as possible. I can't stop the bill at this stage. That requires the whole House of Commons. But what I can do is support amendments which are being tabled by Labour colleagues, Liberal Democrats, Conservatives, to try and improve the bill. And I think we all understand that that is the proper job of a committee. And I want to see, if this bill were to pass into law at the end of this whole process, that we have a bill that is as safe as possible, even if I still think that overall it's the wrong thing to do.
I remember speaking to you before the vote in the Commons when you were laying out your opposition to what was happening, and you were talking with Margaret Hodge, who spoke about her reasons for supporting assisted dying. She said that you should vote it through at second reading and then improve it at committee stage. How is that working out?
Well, I'm afraid that was the argument used by the proponents of the bill, I think slightly unfairly, because they know, and certainly Margaret Hodge, experienced parliamentarian, knows that committees can only do so much. Once it's gone through second reading, the bill as a whole is on its way to becoming law. Yes, we can amend it. Yes, we can say no to the whole thing again, which I hope is what will happen at the end. But there's only so much that can be done. And this, the really substantial problems with this bill from beginning to end, from the moment that a doctor starts talking to a patient about it, right through to the way we have or don't have a judge concluding it's okay. In fact, beyond that, to the point of the administration of death, the whole business of what drugs will be used and what side effects there might be, and the whole process of dying, that's not very clearly dealt with. From beginning to end, there are problems. We can't deal with all of those in committee or in the later stages. So, I regret that we passed it at second reading, but here we are. And we've got to do what we can to improve it if it passes, or to make clear to MPs that those who voted for it in good conscience, hoping that these safeguards would be strengthened in the bill, I'm afraid that hasn't happened. And the bill, despite everyone's best efforts, is really not safe. And therefore, having voted for it at second reading, they should say, no, we're not going to proceed at third reading or the later stages.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I do want to say that we will be talking to a supporter of the assisted dying bill next week. But in the meantime, just talk to Hannah and Jonathan about this. Jonathan, what's your take?
Well, look, Danny's a friend, so I thought I'd declare that interest out the gate. But I think he's actually been a remarkable lead of the opposition to this piece of legislation. The amount of work, as he's pointed out, he's been putting into, despite opposing the bill, try and put as many safeguards in so that he and the others can have their conscience as clear as possible that the bill is as safe as possible if it is indeed passed. I think it's the wrong piece of legislation. I don't agree with it. I don't think the state could be able to administer it safely. I don't believe that it should put people in a position where they choose to potentially maybe it being the easier option to take their life rather than actually, going through proper hospice care, which is where Danny's always been arguing we need to have a proper fundamental investment and reform. And ultimately, I also think that the way the legislation has been introduced is not the right. This should go through as a government bill to have the proper legislative scrutiny.
I think the problem I have with the argument around the way it's been introduced is that is the parliamentary system that we have in the UK. So if you're saying that that is inadequate, the Conservatives were in government for a long time. They could have changed that. The private members bill is a sort of strange system. It's a raffle. But nonetheless, legislation goes through like that, and it is important that this bill gets the opportunity. I'm personally a supporter of it. We're going to have our own bill in Scotland, and I think pay tribute to Margot MacDonald, the late MSP, who did a huge amount of work on this. But, I was talking to Kim. I know Kim as well. I'm quite friendly with her, and she's made sure that she had as much time as possible. Has taken evidence from over 50 different organisations. And if anybody out there who's been through the experience of a loved one having a terminal illness and dying, they will understand that these are very difficult decisions, but you want ultimately your loved one to be able to die in the most humane way possible. And that seems like the way that a normal, rational, decent democracy should operate. And so I think fair play to Kim and her team for bringing that forward, and fair play to Danny for, bringing forward his amendments. And what's been nice about it, if you watch the debate, it was one of those moments that I missed being in Westminster. There's not many, but it was really respectful, actually, and people, it was an excellent standard of
I agree with that. The standard of the debate was really
Yes.
top-notch. It really was. Thanks both very much. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Now, one report today suggests the adventurer and presenter Bear Grylls was actually tapped up to be the UK ambassador to Washington before the job was given to Peter Mandelson. So we're going to play a little game. Who said it, Bear or Mandy? Don't go anywhere.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the Nottingham families call for a retrial for Valdo Calacane. A damning NHS report out today says the paranoid schizophrenic's condition wasn't resistant to treatment. Rather, he rejected help. And when he didn't engage with mental health services, he was simply discharged to his GP. Today, the families of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates demand that the case is looked at again and the doctors who treated him are named and held accountable. My full interview with the families coming up on the UK Tonight at 8.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Is it a draw? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No, no, no.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else. It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
The Premier League is exclusively on Peacock. Two of the league's biggest clubs find themselves at the wrong end of the table.
And the mood turns extremely sour.
Desperately chasing a win to turn their season around.
That's a beautiful finish.
Tottenham Hotspur.
To Eriksen. Back towards Amma.
Manchester United. This is the Premier League. February 16, only on Peacock.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, the Mirror reported today that the adventurer, author and presenter Bear Grylls was one of the potential candidates to be the UK ambassador to the US. Now, of course, the job eventually went to Lord Peter Mandelson. It's hard to think of two more different characters, but we're going to play a little game with our panel. And the idea is we're going to work out who said it, Bear or Mandy, right? Very simple, very straightforward. You've got a 50% chance.
Right.
Here is the first one. Who said it, Bear or Mandy? If people started to like me too much, I would lose all my power.
Mandy.
Yeah, it's got to be Mandy.
It was Peter Mandelson. Of course it was. That is a classic Lord of Darkness quote there. Right, how about this one? We're not players in some Greek tragedy.
I reckon that's a Bear comment.
I think that's a Mandy.
It was... Hannah's right. It was also Mandelson. What about this one? The truth is, I need 10 lifetimes to scratch the surface of the things I'd love to do.
Bear Grylls.
Yeah, I'd go with Bear on that one.
You're both right. It is indeed Bear Grylls. Can you imagine if he was UK ambassador? Incredible.
Can you imagine if Peter Mandelson was scrabbling down hills with, you know, being a chief scout?
Right, you only get one chance at life and you've got to grab it boldly.
That sounds like a Bear Grylls motivation quote.
You're absolutely right. It does sound very classic Bear Grylls, and it is Bear Grylls. I'm a fighter, not a quitter.
Mandy.
Yes, Mandelson.
It is Mandelson. He is, I mean, it's true. He's the ultimate survivor, right? It's extraordinary. And how about this one? I come from a line of self-motivated, determined folk, not grand, not high society, but no-nonsense, family-minded go-getters.
It could be either.
I'm going Bear because go-getters is not something I can imagine Peter Mandelson saying. I'm going to go Mandy
just to be
It was Bear Grylls. Well, you were even now, even
yeah,
Stephen.
There we go.
Yeah, very good. I think we can juice. No, we haven't got time for another one. I'll go on. OK, right, we're living on the edge here. Going back into the front line would mean going into the firing line.
Oh, that's got to be Mandelson.
That would not be sensible. I'm not going to do it.
Bear Grylls.
It's actually Peter Mandelson. Potentially not taking his own advice there. Thanks both very much indeed.
Thank you.
SJ's next. I'll see you tomorrow.